take you back to elections now. The polls are hotting up with smaller parties and independents vying for your votes. Will there be an outright winner in the major metros, or will this dynamic split the vote and lead to coalitions? In a recent survey, Ipsos took a look at how people feel about coalitions. And let's speak now to my colleague Ropua Matsena about what's being found. How are people feeling about the possibility that we might have more coalitions?
It's very interesting, Masako. You would think that after what happened in 2016, when this phenomenon first started, people would be a little bit more reluctant. But let's take a look at that. Maybe like about 37% of people say, I would support coalitions, which is very interesting based on what I've just told you about what happened in 2016. And then there's the extreme side, which is also quite high, who say, I really just want to see first what happens before I support coalitions. So that would mean waiting for the next local government elections. But I think the trend that we're going to see as independents and smaller parties come to the fore, the bigger parties are going to lose support. And so those coalitions are going to, at one stage, become absolutely necessary.
Now, Ropua, also, what did you find amongst the older South Africans? Are they in support of coalitions, possibly?
Yes, so older South Africans are apparently a lot more forgiving, and let's take a look at that. Even though they were disappointed by the coalitions that were created after the previous elections, the older cohort of people are a lot more forgiving and are willing to support the coalitions that might come about after these elections. And then, of course, it's the younger people that are like, no, we're going to sit back and we're going to see what happens before we decide to support any partnerships that are going to be created between parties.
That's very strange, I must say, for me, because I thought the older people would be the ones who say no, because they've been so used to one party leading for so long. So I didn't think so. And when you look at the city of Tshwane, a coalition never really worked there. And even in the city of Johannesburg, it didn't work. But tell us a bit more, Ropua, about provinces. How are they feeling in provinces about coalitions?
Yeah, I'm very glad you bring up the metros. We'll get to those in a moment. But yes, let's take a look at those provinces that we're talking about here. So what we find in this data, Masako, is that the poorer or the more rural provinces support coalitions. The big reason for this is that they are very small communities and they can't afford to fight amongst each other, because we know that's what coalitions are. There's a lot of fighting. Whereas in the bigger, more populous provinces, you can afford those fights and the divisions because they're bigger and there's a lot more to be done. But in the smaller communities, people have to get along because fights there could collapse municipalities. And that's why you find that the more rural provinces or the less populous provinces are the ones that support coalitions the most.
Now let's come to the EFF. Interestingly, it seems their supporters are more about coalition governments. Is it because they were the kingmakers back in the previous local government elections, sharing some of these municipalities with, for instance, the DA?
That's one of the reasons. Let's take a look at that, in fact, Masako. So what we saw here is the EFF supporters coming out quite a bit in support of coalitions. Now, the face that the EFF presents to the public is not one of coalitions. It's one that says we want to govern and we want to govern fully. But it looks like EFF supporters say if it's a way for us to get into some kind of power, then we'll support the coalition. So definitely one of the reasons that you've just mentioned, but also this idea that if we can govern in some form or shape, then we're happy to support a coalition. And then obviously ANC supporters increasingly supporting coalitions. And I think a big one for this one is because they're losing support. And so because they don't have the majority, an outright majority, they need to partner up to remain in local government. So I think these trends are going to continue to increase as we go through further elections.
Well, that does make sense. But very quickly, Ropua, because we have to wrap, in terms of these metros that I mentioned, I mean, a coalition in the city of Tshwane didn't work, a coalition in the city of Johannesburg didn't work, and these are highly contested metros.
That's right. Let's take a look at that. In fact, correctly, you say that they didn't work when they were established in 2016. In fact, there was a lot of disaster, and it really led to people not getting their basic services for an extended period. And in fact, we're still seeing that filter through to today. But interestingly, in all three major metros, Masako, despite what happened, a lot of them are saying we are going to be supporting coalitions. So the data is very interesting in terms of what's coming out, but the raging sound here is that we're not going to have outright majorities, therefore we're going to need to be partnering up a lot more.
It's going to be very interesting because these political parties have been saying give us outright majority. Thank you very much, Ropua Matsena.